Hello, Eri Express media viewers. We have special guests tonight. It's kind of a reunion. They're Eritreans. We see them as Eritreans. So first, I'll let them introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll discuss how they grew up in Eritrea, the recent visit that we had. I was blessed to be with them this last time. We can start with John, and then we'll go according to the what I see here. Or we can go John, Paul. So it depends. Okay, so we'll start with John.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm John Mahaffy. It's good to be here, and I'm thankful for the fellowship with fellow Eritreans.
Just briefly about you were born in Eritrea. You came how old when you were here?
I was born in Assab, grew up mostly in Senafe. We moved to Senafe in 1952. And I lived there until I graduated from high school, came to the United States for college work in 1963.
Thank you, John. Paul, I see Paul next.
So I'm Paul. I'm number 3 child of Francis and Arlena Mahaffy. I think after John, my mother had 7 children, and we were all up in the highlands after that. So I was born in Asmara, as were the younger siblings. Presently, I'm a NASA scientist working on planetary science, have experiments on Mars and so on. And it certainly it's great to have this reunion. It was just a memorable trip we had, I guess, at the end of 2018, and got to see the sights and sounds of Eritrea that we had not experienced since 1966. So a long time ago. It was great.
Thank you. So we go to Peter.
Thank you, Isaias. It's wonderful to see you again and to see the background for your interview, which brings back so many memories. So I'm Peter. I was the 5th child of Francis and Arlena, and the 5th boy. Brother Samuel, who many know in Eritrea, was 2 years older than me, and then Paul, 2 years older than Samuel. So Samuel is a person we miss, especially today as we have this interview. And so I was 12 years old when we came back to the United States, to Chicago. And after getting my PhD in chemistry, a few years later, we moved up to Western Canada, to Edmonton, where I'm a professor of chemistry at the King's University. And I think the main reason we moved here was because we're close to the Canadian Rockies, and so there are some mountains like the one in your background that we like to spend time with.
Good. All right. Thank you, Peter. Cheryl, since you're next to Peter.
I'm married to Peter, so that's how I came to know about Eritrea. And it was actually my second visit there, because I went in the mid-90s with a group of mostly women. And we visited a lot of projects that were ongoing, mostly with NGOs in Ethiopia and Eritrea. That happened to be a time, thankfully, when we could cross the border. So we didn't realize at that point how significant that was, but I was really happy to be able to do it then. And now to return, it was a wonderful trip.
Thank you, Ashia. And then Renee.
Hi, I'm Renee. I was Samuel's wife. Our family has been very blessed in how much Samuel passed on the love of Eritrea to us. The very first date we had Eritrean food. The second date we had Eritrean food. So I was inducted, and I believe Samuel brought the cooking of the food into the family on kind of a continual basis. That's still ongoing. But Samuel carried such deep love for Eritrea, and really the last part of his life was focused entirely on telling more of the story of Eritrea in what he viewed as a fully accurate way to help those of us that are here to understand better. So it's been an honor to get to know more Eritreans, and Isaias was a wonderful guide and fellow companion with us when we traveled there in 2018. We actually took Samuel's remains back to the village that he grew up in Senafe, and I know that he would have loved to nothing more than to have been there in person. He tried several times to make a trip to Senafe, but wasn't able to because of circumstances with his health. So returning there was the appropriate and joyous thing for him.
Thank you, Renee. Sylvan?
Thank you, Isaias. Salam, I'm Sylvan. I'm the son of Samuel Mahaffy, and I was born in the US, but I grew up hearing stories about Eritrea. My entire childhood, my dad told so many stories about the Matara that you see behind me in the photo, and the desert around there, and the mountains, and it felt very familiar to me when I saw it in person for the first time, because he had told me so many stories and it had always been part of my life. So it was wonderful to go there and see it in person.
Okay, thank you, Sylvan. And Camilla?
Hi, everyone. I'm Camila Mahaffy, and I'm the sister to Sylvan and daughter of Renee and Samuel. And I was also not born in Eritrea, but I had the opportunity to go back with many of the people on this call in 2018. And like Sylvan, I grew up hearing a lot of stories about Eritrea, and Dad would cook the food and taught my sister and I and Sylvan how to make it. So to be back there and see all these places that we'd heard about growing up was really special. So thank you for including me today.
Thank you. So you can, any of you can jump, but so John or Peter or Paul, how was your daily life in Eritrea when you were growing up? I mean, let's see how the day looks like for you guys.
Get up in the morning, have some breakfast. We'd spend some time in family devotions, and then much of the day was schoolwork. Our parents taught us through about 8th grade and then supervised high school work by correspondence. And so that filled up much of the day.
And then what is the rest of the day? Because we hear about Paul being the best soccer player. When we, so maybe, so did he have time, or how was the playtime? You had enough to play time, or? Because you used to climb the mountain of the cross behind your house and so forth. When is that all done?
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, it was much more unstructured than a school would be here. My mother was teaching us all, you know, until we got too old for her to teach us. But she taught me through my second year of high school. And but because it was kind of unstructured with the usual semesters or quarters, you know, we would have the flexibility to go out and climb mountains. We did that all the time. I certainly really lived for my after school play with the soccer ball, either in the right outside the house where we lived in Senafe. In fact, when we came back to Senafe, we hooked up with a couple of people we had played soccer with 50 years ago. And then when the big boys came back from college, some of them from Addis, then we would play in the big field up the hill. And so, yeah, lots of memories, climbing mountains. You know, my father was an avid gardener, so we would tend to the garden. A stork flew out of the eucalyptus tree next to our house one time, and so we had a pet stork. I had a pet cliff springer, and we always had chameleons or praying mantises, or I occasionally brought a scorpion or two in the house, which my mother didn't appreciate. But yeah, lots of things to occupy us. Just, I mean, a beautiful, beautiful country, and just a variety of interesting things to pay attention to. Our older brother, my older brother, James, who's not on this telecon, was just fascinated by everything nature. And he ended up being a biologist and ended up teaching biology. But lots of nature to pay attention to in Senafe.
Since Peter was the youngest from the boys, how about you?
It's interesting for me to hear my older brothers. I think John, being child number one, talks about a very structured school time, and Paul talks about it being less structured and more time to play and climb mountains. And by the time you get to son number 5, I mainly remember the mountains and playing soccer. But I think, you know, Mother was an amazing teacher. And one of the things that she did was was have us go to school year round. We didn't know until we came back to the United States that in the US, children don't go to school year round. And so she would make assignments for us the night before, and we could get up as early as we wanted to by the time son number 5 came along anyway. And we could do our homework, and she was there to help us, and father helped us with some things too. And older brothers helped with things, and we helped our younger sisters. But then when that work was done for the day, and that might be at noon or 1 o'clock, then we could go out, and we lived on the mountains and on the soccer field. And I have memories of life being just wonderfully full of people in our family, the Eritrean friends that we played with on the soccer field. And that's what our days were like.
So from what I get, Peter, you're saying that when there were a number of kids were smaller, it was more structured. When there were more kids, it became unstructured.
Well, that's only my perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when you're only 1 and when you're 7, it's 2 different things. But it looks like I've seen a couple of pictures where we're helping you out with school. And I mean, we don't have to answer it now, but I mean, how did that kind of homeschooling, we can call it, right? And then you come to the States, it's totally different, right? Were you prepared for it, or were you, have you come, let me put it first. Before you moved here in 1966, or John in 1963, have you ever been here to this country? Or when you came here the first time, that was the first time?
Yeah, so we would come back every 5 years, I guess, for a period. They called it furlough. And so I think I was in 3rd grade once for that, but rapidly lost whatever good habits I gained in classrooms. And it was, what was different being homeschooled, and I would say in the very fluid environment of Senafe with lots of things to do, going into a structured high school was very, very different for me. And one of the main things was trying to deal with classes ending on the hour, or tests that ended at a certain time. I know the pre-college tests, I took the first one, the SAT, and was taking my time and answering all the questions right. Get about 2/3 of the way through, and time's up, you know. And so I scored abysmally. But then the ACT test, the next one I took, I learned my lesson. Quick learner, and got through that, and scored very, very well. And immediately got hauled into the principal's office when I was a junior in Chicago. And okay, who'd you cheat from? These 2 scores aren't compatible. So it took me a while, but I adjusted.
Oh, good.
I would echo what Paul was saying there. I think our education was very solid. When we would come back to the United States, whatever grade level we were in, there was usually some kind of placement test, and we invariably tested at or above grade level. Mom and Dad were good teachers, but the adjustment, and I would echo what Paul said, the adjustment to working with a class was the big adjustment. I was used to being able to take extra time if I was struggling with something, or to work quickly through something that was coming easily, and working with a class was difficult. But I'm the uneducated one in the family. All of my brothers went on to earn PhDs, and so critics of homeschooling can look at my brothers.
So would you say that parents are good teachers as opposed to regular teachers? Or
I answer that the way I answer questions about what was it like to grow up in Eritrea, and it was home. It was beautiful, and it was home. And what was it like to be taught by our mother? I don't know. Wasn't everybody taught by your mother? I think we learned how to be very independent learners. We learned how to teach others who we were learning with, and to learn from them. And I think those are things that have really benefited me through my life.
so how about culturally? Were you, because I remember Samuel telling me a story, which I'll tell you, but was there anything cultural? I mean, you were coming every 5 years or so? But since most of you youth, you grew up there, the culture is a little bit different and so forth. So is there anything that not shocked you, but that took for you time to get used to? Is there any story or anything like that? For example, Samuel was telling me that, in the bus, whatever, people will be sitting. He's sitting down and all the people are standing, and you get up and, you let people sit down, and people look at him like, why is he doing this? That kind of thing. So there are several different things like that are like, that could be, different. I know some Eritreans, when they come here, they find it different. When the neighbors don't say hello or something, it's like, what? I mean, that kind of thing, subtle things. Is there anything that when you came here in the beginning that were like so different that like it took you time for you to get used to?
I think what stands out for me, Isaias, was I came back as a very young high school student, partly because I started school when I was early, because I told my mother when I was 4 that she tells me when I was 4 and Samuel was starting school, Samuel and I did everything together. So I said, well, I'm starting school too. And she said, okay. And so I was young when I came back to high school in Chicago. And it was a very homogenous high school, and I think middle class and maybe upper middle class students. And I found that the students I was getting to know cared much more about things than I did. And I think we were ingrained with caring about people and community. And so it was in that community you had to have certain things in order to be accepted. And for us, that was foreign. And I think a little impoverished to see the way that community was not practiced among some of our students. We adjusted, we came to know students and teachers well and really appreciated it, but it took some time.
So if we go back to, for our viewers who are not aware, could you tell us about how your parents went there, when they went there? We mentioned at the beginning they're missionaries, but if you could tell us a little bit about that, how long they were there and so forth.
John would be a good person to jump in there. I mean, it was 1945 when the war was just ending. And so I guess the boats were blacked out at night in case stray submarines were not informed that the war was over. And then the first assignment was down by the Red Sea where John was born. And John, you might fill in a little bit of that history.
Yeah. Paul's correct there. Our parents sailed from New York City on VE Day, the day that the Nazis surrendered in Europe. But very tight security. They were on a boat. They didn't know for sure where they were going. They were simply told, you are going to a place from which you can get transportation to where you are going. And they ended up going to Alexandria, Egypt, and were able to get a boat that went down to Massawa. But they didn't know when they left how they would get from wherever this boat took them. But they worked down at Assab for a while, then some time in the town of Ghindae, then split some time between Irafaile down on the end of the Zulu Bay and up in Senafe. Getting to know people, getting to know the language were big parts of family life.
Mm-hmm. So totally they were there for 27 years, is that right?
Yeah.
About right?
Yeah.
Okay, so 27 years. Do you know, or have you heard from your parents, what were the challenges, for example, of being Protestants in an environment of Orthodox population or a Muslim population? And then on a follow-up, your dad, Francis Mahaffy, spoke Saho, he preached in Saho and so forth. And also I've seen the vocabulary or the writing that was in the 50s or so. So if you tell us about that.
I think my parents made lots of friends, had a good, close relationship with many people. There were some people who were quite open to talking with them. There were some people who were less open. They never had the idea of trying to force what they believed on people, but they welcomed the conversations and discussions. And I can remember my father in particular spending many hours talking with people who had questions when he would speak at a little room that he rented off the marketplace in Senafe. After the message, he would open it up for questions and discussions, and sometimes discussions would go on for an hour or sometimes an hour and a half or 2 hours. So a lot of interaction.
I mean, you can tell by the respect and so forth of the Mahaffys. When we went at the funeral, there were people who came from wherever, the family, have heard of the family, as you've seen, it's the whole town came out. So that shows your parents' involvement with the community and so forth. So I think that's a witness, and because it's still, I mean, I heard about the Mahaffys first in San Jose. So I mean, so it's the work that they did and so forth was remarkable. But one of the impressive parts about that is that your father was working on the Saho vocabulary, and also to write the script, because like Tigrinya, Saho doesn't have the script, so he was working on the Latin script or to use the Saho language. So do you have the story behind it, or how long it took him and so forth? Because that's the story that needs to be told. I know they use now in Saho, they use the script, the Latin script, which was done recently, as opposed to when your dad originally wrote some of the stuff. So how is there a story behind it, or anything you can add?
He had a great love for the Word of God, and recognized how precious it is to be able to read the Word of God in your own language, and had that desire for all of Eritreans. There was a Tigrinya Bible, but Saho-speaking people didn't have that, and basically it was much of his life there focused on that. He started out working in Dankale, down in the Dankale language down in Assab, but then switched over to Saho and continued to work at it, developing dictionaries, building his own vocabulary, working with people who were native speakers, and doing translation work, and becoming more and more fluent in preaching in it and talking to people in it.
How about you? Your mom went to Eritrea, I think, when she was in the 80s or early 90s, because I read somewhere in the Texas newspaper.
She went in 1993, I think it was.
How old was she when she went there?
So she was born in 1917. So what would that make her? 770, I guess. Am I doing the math right, Brother Paul?
76.
And that was such an important visit for her to be able to go back for the first time. And this was after independence. And then as you asked your question, Isaias, I think of the fact that so often the stories of women aren't told as much. And Mother's story was a story of course, being a mother and a friend to many people and a school teacher, but she also did a lot of work with the resources she had to help with health issues. And a very good friend of hers was a midwife by the name of Tiblitz, and Mother and Tiblitz would work together if someone would come in and need some medicine or and so on. So that was a big part of her life in Eritrea.
Yeah, because Mother Arlena had been very, like all women, the backbone of societies or families and so forth. So I think her work in teaching you and also, collaborating with Tiblitz, talking about, and also with and then I like that famous picture where she's pouring coffee to that. I think that's a classic picture. I think I like that one. So it shows that her connections with the family and neighbors and entire communities it's very important.
She never had any formal medical training, but particularly when we were down at the town of Irafaile, which is 60, 70 kilometers from any medical care at that point, and someone would get bitten by a snake. And my parents had the anti-venom So they would treat people from snake bites or scorpion stings, or people would come in with ulcers, and my mother would do what she could. She had a little bit of knowledge she'd picked up here and there and some medical supplies and would work with that. She also helped with some of the literacy work, drawing charts and pictures for teaching people to read Saho, to help them associate the letter of the alphabet that was being used with a particular word that began with that letter. So she did the artwork on things like that.
So since you mentioned Assab and Irafaile, you were born in Assab, right?
Yes.
And I heard you were very sick when you were born. Is that right?
It was a difficult delivery, very hard on my mother. I was somewhat ill. The transportation to and from Assab was by a small boat that ran between Assab and Massawa, and the only passage was on deck. I'm too young to remember it, but my mother says that even though she kept me in the shade, the sunlight reflecting off the water gave me a very bad sunburn. She was afraid I was going to be scarred for life. They were there several years, mostly in the winter time, but up in, at least in Ghindae or maybe Irafaile in the hotter time.
So I want to let others in the conversation and then we can come back. Let's start with food, because earlier Cheryl mentioned about food, and Renee also mentioned food, that when you and Samuel were dating, you were the first day Eritrean food, the next day Eritrean food. And I think I also remember Cheryl saying that when I think Francis Mahaffy said, well, you have to like Eritrean food to be in that family. Is that right? Am I misquoting? So anyway, so food has an important role, looks like here. So let's start with Renee, and could you tell us about, how you met and, the first time you heard about Eritrea and so forth?
Well, I just wanted to add that we still use Eritrean food as a bit of an entry gate for anyone coming into our family. So
the tradition continues, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So Samuel and I met in Spokane, Washington, I think that Samuel just was not an American male. He carried all of the beautiful traits from the Eritrean culture, and that was noticeable immediately. So many things that have been said, I saw in Samuel, like, the importance of community and relationships, the high value of education in the Mahaffy family, all of them carry. And so I just feel blessed that I was able to spend the number of years that we did as a family unit. He, as Sylvan said, he told to the kids, he told so many Eritrean stories. When I first met him, he was doing a lot of driving for his work, and Sylvan was in the car with him a lot. And so he would tell stories related to Eritrea, but he always had a very subtle point or moral. So whatever was going on in Sylvan's life, one of the characters was Farsight the eagle that would be flying. And so, but Farsight would always have these wisdom pieces that somehow were timely or perfectly met to the situation. One time we were driving down the road and Sylvan and his buddy fell asleep in the story. This was very early when we knew each other, and Samuel stopped telling the story and I was like, wait a minute, keep going. I want to hear the end. So he carried that narrative sense of relating with people. And I think that was one of the things that connected him to people so closely throughout his life. Sylvan was 8, I think, when I was connected with him. And then Samuel and I had twins in 1996, Camila and Hannah. So anyway, just having a family together was an incredibly rich experience. And he passed on through stories, but really the love that he carried for Eritrea and the Eritrean people was just so evident and so continual with who he is. So many things that, you know, John and Paul and Peter have mentioned, all those early things in Senafe. They had a big garden behind the house, and I don't exactly know the details, you guys would, but somehow they had jobs and they could swap jobs. And so Samuel's job, he somehow swapped. He was thrilled. He swapped to take care of most of the garden, if not all of it. He told me all, but I don't know if that's exactly true. So maybe it seemed like all, but anyway. But you know, that love of gardening and that connection to the earth was always there, and just so many of those early seeds that were, or those early parts of the Mahaffy family. This surprised me right before he passed. He had been ill for a number of years, and he said, you know, the thing that I missed the most with my illness was climbing mountains. And I didn't know that. I mean, he never let on or, you know, pined for that to us externally, but so that the mountains were so much a part of him. His perception of school was, you get up really, really early, which he did his whole life. And his joy was to bring his mom a cup of coffee in bed. That was his joy. And then get his schoolwork done as quickly as he could, but you know, not cutting corners, because that wouldn't have worked in the family, to do a good job on his homework. And then his perception was by about 10, he was out in the mountains all day. And then he would come home for dinner. They had to be home at dinner time. But he said that he used to show up, he'd be in the mountains all day alone, and he would show up with white lines by his eyes because he had been smiling so much in the sun in the mountains. And his family would say, you know, what are you doing up there? You're smiling, and you were up there alone. But, you know, his heart was just, I think, expanded there. So. How
about Cheryl? You mentioned you have to like Eritrean food in order to be the family. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is still true in our family. I would say everybody who joins the family, I don't think they're forced to, but they quite quickly.
The message is that.
Yeah.
So if you could tell us how you met Peter and all that, and how were you introduced to Eritrea? You were introduced through Peter, I'm sure. And if you could tell us a little.
Yeah, for sure. We were in a college in the cornfields in Iowa, and Peter was living with my older brother, Lloyd. And through that relationship, got to know Peter, and then eventually followed him to Indiana when he began graduate school. And I finished college at Indiana University and went on to earn a master's in journalism. And from there we moved to Minnesota and then to Canada, and certainly eating Eritrean food all the way.
Continuous, right? Okay. So now, Sylvan and Camila. So you both of you mentioned that you've been hearing about Eritrea, you know, for a long time, ever since you were kids, and you went to Eritrea for the first time in 2018, right? In December, the end of this 2018. So what was your impression, and did the image that was created in your by Samuel, did it match with the reality or the physical when you went to Eritrea?
Yes, absolutely. That was something I noticed right away, especially in Senafe, that my dad had told so many stories of it that it felt familiar when I arrived already. And I hadn't really seen photos. I had seen a few photos from their childhood, but he told such detailed stories that I knew this landscape already, and I knew this village. And so it was really wonderful to see it in person and come to a place that felt so familiar and like it was such a big part of our family, and be there for the first time in person.
I would second that. I think the few things that stick out to me, I remember hearing a lot of stories from Dad about climbing the mountain of the cross. like mom said, he loved to climb mountains. And so getting to Senafe and seeing the Mountain of the Cross for the first time was kind of a surreal experience. This place that we heard so much about growing up. And I agree with Sylvan about the landscape, but I was just sort of laughing to myself because some of the stories I remember the most that he told when I was a kid were like adventure or mystery stories that were set in Eritrea that were in some ways fiction, but based in like the landscape or the people in Eritrea. And so I think I had this picture of Eritrea as this sort of magical place with Leona and Lena, these magical lions that I heard about growing up. So to come to Eritrea and see the country and meet the people, it sort of brought me down to earth, to sort of reality. But there was still some, I guess, like magic in those stories that I'd heard when we went to Eritrea in person.
Especially that curve to come down to Senafe to see that village. A lot of people have that image of that Senafe because you turn around the corner and then you see this huge valley on the left and then flat in the middle. And then this huge mountain in the background. So the background that I have, Peter took that picture. So that valley and the image of that, a lot of people who've gone to Senafe talk about that vision of Senafe is that. So it's always that image of, and then the mountains and so forth. I know Peter and Paul, you and Cheryl was also there, right? Climbed the Mountain of the Cross. And I was telling earlier off the camera, the discussion about the background that picture background that I have and also Sylvan has doesn't give it justice to the reality because it's huge. And then climbing this mountain, I've climbed it, but I haven't gotten to the top of the Mountain of the Cross. Because I'm going to ask Peter and Paul, how did you climb, and also Cheryl, how did you climb that Mountain of the Cross? Because it had that one, what is that? It's not a rope. What is it? It's a
cable.
Cable. Okay. So when I saw that, I said, we went to film there. We took a picture. I mean, in a clear day from the top of the mountain, you can see all across Massawa on the top. But I haven't gone all the way up, but looking up, and I said, okay, well, I like to film whatever, but not at that cost. I look at like the cable. And so how did you, I mean, you grew up climbing it, whatever, but after 52 years for Paul, it's something else. So that means next time I go there, I have to do that because if Paul can do it, I can do it.
So we were fearless back then. In fact, probably, certainly on my end, took a lot more risks than I think the family, the parents appreciated for sure. And Sylvan will laugh because I think 50 years later, I'd lost a step or two. But when I was 15 and 16, we would just scramble up the mountains. It was, we would find challenging places and send the best person up with a rope and then send the rope down and keep the other people safe. But I think we developed, reasonably good skills in getting, the mountains are beautiful because the ones in your background way off in the distance are not granite primarily, but where the picture was taken from, the Mountain of the Cross and so on, is just solid granite. So you can find a challenging place to climb with finger holds and toe holds and work your way up. And so it was just a great challenge and lots of fun to be climbing the mountain, certainly for my part.
Go ahead, Peter.
My recollection there is that my two siblings who were on the call, they were the people who were designated always, John or Paul, to go first up a very challenging climb. Sometimes we would do chimney climbs where your back goes up and then your feet and your back and your feet. And the rest of us would wait for either John or Paul to go ahead of us with a rope around their shoulders. They would get to the top and then they would tie a rope around a tree or a boulder, and then we would put it around our waists as we moved up, just as a way of being safe on those mountains.
So how did you do it this time? The same way?
This time when we went up on the
Yeah, when
Matla?
you went this, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a secret.
First, how high is from the base to the mountain of the cross? How high is that?
It's 1,000 feet. And, Paul mentioned that he was maybe one step slower and after 50 years. And the other thing I can say is we were both just a little bit more forgetful than we were 50 years ago. So when we went to climb, we were both quite sure we knew the way, but the paths are a little different than they were 50 years ago. And our memories aren't quite as good as they were. And so this time, two village boys from Matara came along, and they were our guides, and they were quite amazing. And when we got to, you climb a ways up and it's not technical, and then you come to a section that's maybe 75 or 100 meters where you have to take the cable and then you have to swing around onto a ledge, and it's a little intimidating. But our guides just scampered up and said, "Come on, nah." And up we went.
So how about Cheryl? You also climbed it, right?
Well, I probably stopped about where you did, Isaiah.
Oh, okay. So you didn't go that. Okay, I was going to ask you because
No, I didn't use the cable.
Okay,
I think I could have, but
yeah, because when I looked at it, I said, "Oh my gosh!" Especially with the camera and stuff, I said, "No way."
Yeah.
Actually, the kids.
You had a good excuse.
I had a good excuse, I know. But and then when we went there, there were the kids. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 kids from Senafe who were showing us the way, like you mentioned. And then they were telling us a story where there were 2 Eritrean, I guess, teenagers or maybe, young people, maybe 19, 20, but they were they said they were built huge, and they were trying to climb, and they went halfway and they just couldn't going to make it. One of them, they were asking me, "What does it mean?" They said, he keeps saying, "Oh, I miss DC because they're from DC and they couldn't climb it." And he looked at it and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I miss DC." I guess their parents were go there because of the religious something, God, whatever, and then we'll go and visit this place or something like that. So, from what I understand, the kids were saying that they came for like a pilgrimage kind of thing, and the kids were going up, but they've never seen anything like it. So one of the guys was saying, "Oh my gosh, I miss DC. I miss DC." It was telling me that before I climbed them. I'm like, okay, wait a minute, that's not a good. So
I have to say I was really impressed because Peter said they don't remember the way up, but when we got to the part with the cable that was really steep, Paul got to that cable, and it was like he had this memory in his muscles where he swung across that, and it was like he remembered right when he got there what climbing this mountain was like, and you could see that memory come back. So it was really, I really loved that.
Were you there, Sylvan?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought it was okay. I didn't know.
Yeah,
that.
it was amazing.
Yeah, it was fun when we were kids. We must have climbed that dozens of times. In fact, what we would do, we took a look when we were up there. We would bury a little bottle with signatures. So every time we went up there, we would mark the date, put the signature down. But anytime we had visitors, that was always, "Oh yeah, we can take you up to the top of the mountain," and off we would go.
So was there any sign that you've left last time that you saw on there or no?
No, we took a look under some rocks and didn't see anything that we had left for 50 years ago.
Okay. So Sylvan, so you went up the cable too or no?
Yeah.
Wow. So what was the impression? Is that the first time you did something like that, or?
So I've done a lot of climbing because my dad taught me to climb when I was very young. So I'm very comfortable being on rocks. But that cable was completely different from any climbing I've done, where you're on this very steep rock face and you have to grab this cable and you're on a very narrow ledge and you have to swing from one ledge to another. And it's a little bit scary. And it was very exciting once we got through that part, and our guides were very helpful, and I got to see my uncles who had done this a million times, and that helped me understand how to do it.
So to come back down, did you have to go back across the cable?
Yeah,
Wow.
for sure. Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Impressive.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Samuel
yeah,
used
go
to
ahead.
tell a story about that you often would take visitors up, but he also told the story about that you guys knew a secret or a path to get up. He said that you could have helped that Italian general get down if you boys had been living there at that time. No?
I
Yeah,
think
that could
I
be.
think that's right next to the lion he told Camila about.
Oh,
Yeah, he was definitely a storyteller, and I think some of his stories had some fiction to them. But
They were magical.
yeah, they were
Isaias,
magical.
Isaias, one of the things your question just elicits for me, you talked about coming around a big curve, and then you talked about climbing the mountain. And I'm reminded of what those mountains and that curve have been witness to over centuries and so many years. And my first return to Senafe was in 2002 when I was doing some work at Asmara University, and colleagues from the university took me back to Senafe. There were still peacekeeping troops south of Senafe. And when we came around Big Curve, we stopped the car. I said, I have to get out. I have to look at this. And here's the big Senafe sign. And so I stood next to it, and they took my picture. And then my colleague, Barhani from the university, said, the smile on your face is amazing, but do you know what you're standing on? And so I looked down, and I was standing on a trench from the war, and just reminded of how much blood was shed there. Amba Matara has seen so much of that. And so, these mountains and these hills are witnesses to so much of what's happened in Eritrea. And to come back in 2018 at a time of peace, and to hope fervently that the children of Senafe will not grow up experiencing more conflict, that was really my greatest desire when we returned.
Do you know when the cross was built? Do you know, is that the Italian time or?
Yes, as far as my parents remember, it was always
was already there?
Yes, it was already there. So back in Italian days.
We'll find out exactly when it was built, but yeah, it's still solid though. It's still well built. Mm-hmm. So so going back to 2018, what was it was a lot of coordination and so forth. When I talk to people, for example, the last wish of Samuel was that he's to be buried in Eritrea, and that's testimony to the root of the family, the upbringing, and so forth, and the love of Eritrea. And and when I was talking to Samuel, he liked the idea of when we invited him to come to talk to Auckland, in Auckland, 2014 or so. And the title that I used for the presentation, because I was coordinating the panel discussion, was that part of the title says the other Eritreans. There was another Italian, he was not born in Eritrea, but he went to Eritrea when he was young and grew up in Eritrea, and then moved to Canada. So, and he'd written about his life in Eritrea. So he said, he's been so the title of that discussion was The Other Eritreans, and Samuel liked that. I didn't want to use the other Eritreans because he was Eritrean, born there, and, raised there. But there were other non-Eritreans, but who were born or raised in Eritrea. But for them, we had said the other Eritreans, they're Eritreans, and so forth. So he kind of liked the other Eritreans part of it. But I told him that you guys were born in Eritrea, so you're Eritreans. This refers to people who came to Eritrea and so forth. So, but he was getting ready to come to the panel, to the International Conference of Eritrean Studies that was in July. And I had already gone there. He had sent his presentation, his paper there. When I got there, it was already there. I was in 2 or 3 different panel discussions, and he was on the schedule. He was in 1 or 2. When I heard that day that he had passed, I mean, I didn't know about it because it was a few weeks later, but they mentioned it at the conference. So I read his paper in the presentation that he was going to do. And for me, it was very emotional. So I had to ask someone to read it. Luckily, there was the young lady who's studying in Sweden. I read the paper, but the introduction part she had to do because I couldn't continue. So it was really, his love for Eritrea and so forth was impeccable. And the way people in Senafe went out was impressive. If Renee could explain how the process went to go up there. I already know, but for people who...
So I think I mentioned before that there had been several occasions that Samuel, had hoped to come to Eritrea. One was the 25th anniversary of the independence, which I think was a couple years before that. Is that correct to say?
Yeah.
And then this conference, so he was completely planning on coming to the conference. He had arranged to travel with another one of his dear Eritrean friends because he knew he was quite ill. And so they had made contingency plans if he arrived in Eritrea and needed to get some medical treatment. But so the week before the conference, the week before he passed, we were still arranging things for him to come. He just said, if I don't come back, I want to be left in Eritrea. It was a really big deal for him to see the Eritrean community create this academic conference. It felt like, I think, to him, a symbol of hope, of recovery for Eritrea. To have the freedom and the coming together of all these people that were both in Eritrea and the diaspora community around the world, because he felt like the diaspora community, was well educated and had contributed in many countries in many arenas. So I think coming back together in that conference, he found very exciting.
Yeah, so it happened 2 years after he passed away. And then we took his
explain kind of how the process.
Yeah, and then we had to arrange the different, people here and in Eritrea and so forth for it to be the way you expected it, or how did it go for you?
So here in the States, Samuel was very close with you, and you provided a lot of support in the process. And he was very close to Emmanuel Johannes. And he also supported, Emmanuel lives in Seattle. And so he and I we were meeting probably once a week. And then the governmental officials of Eritrea actually were instrumental in arranging many of the details and many of the approvals that were needed, that kind of thing. We worked with Esther. I don't know.
Esther.
And she, I think she was touched by some of the stories told about Samuel at the conference, and took it upon herself to help. She wanted to create some sort of memorial aspect to that. And so she was instrumental actually in arranging, she sort of arranged some people on the ground. We had a connection, Michael in Dekamari, who arranged the DAS and the food and sort of the logistics of that. And then we had a contact in Asmara who took Sylvan and I and maybe Camila to arrange for the tomb and a lot of the details that we needed to do in Asmara. But, I think one of the most beautiful things is Samuel was very much always wanting to unify people beyond whatever their differences were. So when we had this service in Senafe, it happened to be at the time that the Christians were fasting and only eating vegetarian food. Is that correct? And so anyway, when we were able to have a meal together, the fact that it was a complete mix of everyone from Senafe being there and eating food together to celebrate Samuel's life, I think would have made him extremely happy.
Yeah, yeah. And how about the rest of you? Sylvan, Camila, Peter.
I guess I really want to recognize the logistical effort that went into this, and we just heard about a little bit of that. But the thing that amazed me so much was that our mother, mostly with a bunch of other people, planned this amazing service from around the world. And there were lots of people on the ground in Eritrea helping, and this whole community came together to plan this. But, you know, we came and the DAS was set up, and we had this amazing feast that we got to share with people from Senafe. And so many people came who remembered the family. And it was such a special moment for all of us. But so much effort went into arranging all of that. And Isaias, you did so much to help with this too. We're so grateful to you and everyone else who really helped this happen, because it was such a special moment, but this moment came with so much work to make it happen.
Yeah, the logistical work that went into it is huge, because you got, like you were saying, in different parts of the country here, and also in Eritrea, within Eritrea, the different parts in Eritrea, you know, and the city in Asmara, and then in Dekamhare and Senafe, and the city administration there, the embassy here. I mean, it's a whole lot of. But I mean, when we looking at it now, it's just the way it went so smooth that it didn't even look like they had to go through all of that. So, but that shows the organizational capacity of the Eritrean people, you know, the connection, you know, and all that. So I think it was a deserving, the entire city, the town coming out, Christian, Muslims, all kinds of, you know, within Christians, different. So I mean, it was very, as a due. I mean, he really deserved, you know, that kind of. And for the first time, I've never seen on a funeral a horse, and they said that if anybody they honor, they put the horse. That was an experience for me too, because I've never. It could be, you know, but I've never seen to the one that has like that. So I think that also shows that. And then there are a lot of people who remember, like I said earlier, a lot of people who remember the Mahaffys and so forth. And even getting to the house, I like the scene where Paul and Peter are saying, "This is the house. No, you're too young. You don't know. You're only too young. You don't remember the house here," and so forth. And we find the house. That was also good. But the funny story that I still always laugh is because I can see it, where Peter was saying that the other Americans who were in Matara, on the other end of the valley, they used to get water from your house to their house, right? So if Peter, if you could tell us that story, how did you? Because I think I can visually see that. And
water came to our house and then was put in 55-gallon metal barrels that were sealed up, and then they were rolled by Eritrean workers from 1 kilometer from our house in Senafe down to Matara. And we would sometimes ride a bicycle along next to the barrels when they were rolling. It was really remarkable.
It's fun, huh? So roll it down, yeah. I can see, because especially if you look at so it's like on the highway, right, on the street.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the go down. So how often was that done?
No, I'm sure it was once a week. Or Americans use a lot of water, Isaias.
Yeah. So the other thing, when we were there, you mentioned was that the electricity was controlled by, was that in Italian?
Mm-hmm.
what was how is that? How is he able to control it? I thought it was the government, or is that how does that work?
So he had he was a kind of a jack of all trades, and he had a diesel engine, I believe, from an old vehicle, and so he would fire that up around dusk time every night for a few hours, and I don't know how many houses he serviced with that, but there wasn't a lot of power. I remember one story where my mother had gotten some gifts from the States, and one was an electric iron. And I mean, normally she would to iron the clothes, she'd put it on the wood stove, heat up the iron and iron clothes. But so she thought she would plug it in. And immediately the Italian guy came running down the street, said, "Oh, you're draining all my power. Don't do that anymore." And we would read at night. We had 3-watt light bulbs. So we would read whatever we wanted to read with 3-watt light bulbs. So a little different now. I guess power comes from up the road, but that was then for sure.
So that's 3 watts. Oh my gosh! The shock is like coming here. The light could be one of the shock too, right? When you came here, it is bright and
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I believe it. And then you mentioned when we were there about your neighbor, Miss Roma.
Oh yeah.
So who was Miss Roma? She's Italian. She's Eritrean, or
she was Eritrean, married to an Italian.
I see. Okay, yeah.
Correct, Paul? And
that's correct. I broke one of her windows one time practicing my slingshot, and heard this tinkle. The stone went over the wall, and Miss Roma's face popped up. She was very unhappy. So she paid a visit to my mother, and I guess they settled all that. But I was in the doghouse.
Yeah. So as kids, how often did you used to go to Asmara? Or
so not very often. My father would go up there every several weeks, I would say, and sometimes he'd take a vacation there, either in Asmara or sometimes we took a vacation in Ethiopia. But the other place that was interesting, John mentioned about Irafaile, and so he would go down there for about a month during the cool season, cool enough season. But I mean, the diversity of the country is just amazing. I mean, the difference between the highlands and the culture and the coastal region is really striking. And this was on a very, almost not very traversable dirt road from Massawa. So if there were any floods or anything, the getting through was often a challenge. But the place in Irafaile, I remember, was near a volcano. Sylvan, the geologist, he would have been interested in that. And we had the opportunity there to, go catch crabs or go fish or whatever in the Red Sea. And the Arabs would come, and the Red Sea there was just full of sharks. So they would come in their dhows and basically mine the sharks, I guess, for their oil or whatever. But so it was a very, very different scene and very different temperature, of course. Up in the highlands, it's very temperate. And down in the lowlands by the Red Sea, it's very, very hot, of course.
So that was one of the biggest surprises of the trip for me, was when we were in Massawa, and then these amazing archaeologists and interpreters took us to Adulis, and where we remember this road that went up and down and over boulders and so on. There's now really a very good road to Adulis, which is a good part of the way to Irafaile, and then to see the incredible excavation, discovery of history there, and the very competent and capable historians and archaeologists who are telling that story, the museum in Massawa, and then on site. That was really wonderful.
Oh, good. That's a good segue to have Sylvan and Camila and Cheryl discuss about your trip. So the different parts that we went, what was the most memorable? We went to Massawa, we went to Zazaga, and on the way to Kamhara and all that. So the scenery, the people, what's your reaction to any of those?
I think one thing that stood out to me was toward the beginning of our trip, we went from Asmara to Massawa. And I remember the descent that we took to get to Massawa. The landscape was just beautiful, and it changed so much in the hours that we were on the road. And we got to pass through all the little villages and towns along the way and see lots of people. And we stopped for lunch at one point, and that was quite good. But I just, the sort of rolling landscape and the beauty of that really stuck out to me on the way to Massawa.
I think some of my best memories were climbing the Mountain of the Cross. Absolutely, was one of the most amazing parts. But that trip to Massawa, and Peter mentioned this a little bit, getting to go to the museum there and learn about Eritrean culture and history and science. And this museum's amazing. And the people who work there are so knowledgeable. And then to get to go from that museum to this archaeological dig and get this tour of it from the archaeologists who are unearthing this history. It was really special to get to see it with them. It was unlike any kind of tourist experience. And finally, I just have to get back to the food, as Isaias talked about. I think one of my absolute favorites, it's hard to choose a favorite place we ate because the food was so amazing, but the Shiro restaurant in Senafe, with the Shiro that was in the clay pot and then the smoked one that was so good. I think that was one of the best meals we had there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that because I didn't know there were 4 types of shiro.
And they were all delicious.
And she prepared, Wezoro Lula is her name. One corner of the restaurant is named the Mahaffys corner. And then she pre-opened of the official opening. So she had prepared 4 different dishes of shiro, and that's the first time I heard there were 4 different types, and she had all 4. I know 2 of them. I didn't know even the name, but I know shiro means shiro, but 4 different types of shiro. So that was an experience for me too. So I'm glad you raised that because it's unbelievable. I mean, in the video, we keep eating. It keeps coming. It never ends. It was just like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it's the food is unbelievable. And then the road to Massawa, the height and the meandering road and all that. So that's an impressive view also on that side. And Adulis, of course, and the fish in Massawa is also.
That was so good
delicious.
too.
And so that's what I thought Sylvan was going to talk about.
You're waiting for that.
One of my most memorable meals. Yeah. The fish meal in masala was wonderful.
Yeah. It's I mean, the way the bread is cooked on the side of the. The food was impressive.
Probably the best Christmas meal I've ever had. I think we went on Christmas.
That's right. It was the Christmas day. That's right.
And then had the meal in Massawa in the evening with the fish.
Yeah, that's true. That's correct.
Quite memorable.
I wanted to mark the terracing in Eritrea. I was absolutely stunned by the amount of terracing and the effectiveness. And I guess part of it is because Samuel loved terracing. So in our garden, we had this little tiny hill, but he
little terrace.
He terraced 2 or 3 levels, and he was thrilled with that. And then he would talk about the stonework, remembering the Italians putting together with their hands, and all of that was just, it's so the root of Eritrea. So that was really fun for me.
It's a summer program that high school students do that. And I think they're doing it as we speak. I think I saw some somewhere in the news that they had planted, I don't know. So all those years they've been doing that. So that's why the terracing you see all over the country is like that. And then the archaeology part that you brought, Sylvan, is that maybe reminds me of when you were kids, you used to go and see what's the Humphrey, right? Was that Humphrey, archaeologist who used to dig around Senafe? So Matara, yeah, that's right. So he was there. I mean, you used to go there and talk to him, or what's the story? Or was he stationed there, or how does it work?
He would be stationed there part of the year, and we would go poke around the diggings, and he would say, "I'm looking for something," and we weren't archaeologists, but we would help. I think an archaeologist today would shudder at some of the things that he did. And we heard a little bit of that from our colleagues in Massawa, but nevertheless, some important work, I think, that was done in Matara.
So he was stationed there, he stays in Massawa, I mean, in Senafe, and he had a tent. I mean, he had workers working, digging up for him.
Yeah.
Because he did, let's see, is there anything, you want to add any?
Let me add something. It was amazing seeing, all the different parts of the country that we saw again, from Asmara and the museums. What impressed me was the arts there. I mean, some incredible paintings in the galleries and museums. But what was really fun was being there with you, Isaiah, with your curiosity and your historic knowledge, and you're always digging into what is recorded about past history in the record. And so it was just incredible having you help provide an overview of different places that we were visiting, and putting things in historical context, understanding what had happened in Massawa when the wars were going on, and that type of thing. So just amazing guide to revisit Eritrea after all these years. So thank you so much for all that.
That whole trip was such a precious gift to all of us at a time when we were wanting to honor our brother, and then to receive this gift from you, from official support, and then from the extraordinary love and generosity of ordinary Eritreans. I think that's something that sticks in my mind whenever I think of the trip. And it was just a true gift.
All right. Hopefully we'll have Mary and Elizabeth and others another time. I mean, it doesn't have to be soon, but it would be good to have that. And finally, when do you plan to go back to Eritrea? I'll end it with that one. Okay. John, you need to come to Eritrea. You need to go back.
I would love to come again. I was there for a couple of weeks in 1999.
Oh, okay.
Just for a short visit, but I would love to go again.
For another trip. Time for another trip. Yeah.
Yeah. Time for another trip. So, James has ever been there? Has he been there?
No.
Mary?
No.
Elizabeth?
James and Mary and Elizabeth haven't been back.
Okay.
So
Well,
we need to get them there.
We need to get them there. Yeah, for sure. And John, time to visit again.
It is.
Yeah. So, So it's your home. You can come anytime. It's you don't need invitation. So, thank you for your time. I know it's hard to rearrange and organize. I'd like to thank Paul for getting us all time. So thank you, Paul, with your travel and stuff and arrange it like this. I really want to thank you for that.
Yeah, and thanks. Really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you, Isaiah.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isaias. It's great to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah, it's great to see everyone.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.